Street was quiet in the way only winter evenings in Britain can be. No warning, no shouting, just the low hum of distant traffic and the sound of a car slowing down where it had no reason to stop. In less than a minute, a young man would be lying in the road, and a question would echo through South Yorkshire for years to come: why was he hunted down? This wasn't random violence. This wasn't wrong place, wrong time. What happened next had been set in motion long before that car ever turned the corner. Welcome to Britain's Dark Files, the place where we go beyond the headlines and uncover the truths that never quite make it into the news. Tonight's story exposes how a 20-year-old named Lewis Williams became the focus of a deadly pursuit, and how a chain of decisions, rumors, and fear quietly sealed his fate. If you want to stay with us as we uncover the stories Britain struggles to face, take a moment to subscribe. It helps keep these cases from being forgotten. Lewis Williams was known in his community, not famous, not powerful, just a young man growing up in Mexborough, a town where everyone knows your name before they know your story. To the outside world, Lewis was just another statistic waiting to be printed. But behind the headlines was a life moving through ordinary routines, friends, streets he walked every day, moments that felt safe because they always had been. What Lewis didn't know was that elsewhere, his name was being spoken differently, whispered, questioned, repeated with assumptions attached to it. In places where reputation mattered more than truth, perception had begun to replace reality. And once that happens, innocence becomes irrelevant. On the evening of January 11th, 2021, Lewis stepped into a moment he could not escape. A car approached. Decisions made by others were about to collide with his life. And when the sound shattered the silence, it would expose a terrifying truth. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can be is noticed for the wrong reasons. And this was only the beginning. Long before a car was set in motion, Lewis Williams had already been reduced to a version of himself that existed only in other people's mouths. In certain circles, his name stopped belonging to him. It became a symbol, a rumor, something spoken with raised eyebrows and unfinished sentences. And in places where fear and pride sit side by side, that was enough to start a countdown. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. It began with talks, small, careless conversations where stories were repeated slightly louder each time. Someone claimed Lewis had crossed a line. Someone else insisted he couldn't be allowed to get away with it. No proof was demanded. No clarification sought. What mattered was how it felt to believe it. And belief, once shared, became momentum. The young men watching him weren't masterminds. They were barely out of their teens, navigating a world where respect was currency and backing down meant humiliation. Each conversation pushed them further into a corner of their own making. The more they talked, the harder it became to stop. Silence started to feel like weakness. Action began to feel inevitable. Lewis, meanwhile, went about his life unaware of how dangerously his image had evolved. He didn't know that his movements were being noticed, his routines discussed, his presence interpreted as provocation. In this environment, reality didn't matter nearly as much as perception, and perception had already decided who he was. What's chilling is how ordinary the lead-up was. No dramatic threats, no public confrontations, just a slow, collective agreement that something had to happen and that everyone involved would share the responsibility. By the time the idea of violence was voiced openly, it no longer sounded extreme. It sounded justified. This is how hunts begin in modern Britain, not with rage, but with repetition, not with certainty, but with assumption. And once that line is crossed, there's no clean way back, only forward, toward consequences no one fully understands yet. By the afternoon of January 11th, 2021, whatever doubts still existed had been buried beneath momentum. Plans that once sounded reckless now felt settled, almost routine. A vehicle was ready. Roles were understood without needing to be spoken aloud. And as the car moved through Mexborough, there was no turning back, not without someone losing face, and not without admitting fear. Lewis was unaware of how close danger had drawn. To him, the day carried no sense of finality. He was on familiar ground, surrounded by streets he had walked countless times before. There was no signal to run, no instinctive warning that this moment was different. That's what makes what happened next so devastating. It arrived without permission. When the vehicle appeared, it didn't linger. There was no argument, no exchange of words that could later be misremembered. The violence was sudden, decisive, and overwhelming. Gunfire tore through the ordinary rhythm of the street, collapsing time into confusion and panic. Within seconds, it was over. The car disappeared, and Lewis Williams was left behind. Witnesses froze, some ran, others stood rooted, struggling to process what they had just seen. Sirens would come later, questions would come later, but in that moment, the only certainty was that a life had been taken in broad daylight and nothing could undo it. If you're still with us at this point, take a second to like the video, not for the algorithm, but because stories like this only matter if they're seen and remembered. As emergency services arrived, the reality settled in. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't chaos. It was targeted, deliberate, and almost immediately, the weight of that truth began pressing down on everyone involved, from those who pulled the trigger to those who believed they'd only played a small part. What none of them understood yet was this: the moment the shots were fired, the story stopped belonging to them. From that second onward, it would be taken apart piece by piece, and the real reason behind the hunt would start to surface in ways they never anticipated. What unfolded in court was chilling, not for the violence itself, but for the thought process behind it. Witnesses spoke, not only about what happened that day, but about the days, weeks, and months that led up to it, the rumors, the assumptions, the fear, and the subtle pressures that had quietly pushed events toward a point of no return. It became clear that this killing wasn't spontaneous. It was the product of a mindset where reputation was everything, and hesitation was a risk no one dared take. The courtroom was silent, as testimonies painted a picture of a group of young men, barely adults, caught between loyalty and fear. Every statement, every fragment of dialogue revealed the same pattern: decisions made collectively. Each small choice justified as necessary until all sense of proportion had disappeared. Jurors watched as the prosecution explained how talk had hardened into intent and how the illusion of shared responsibility had allowed the unthinkable to happen. It was here, under the scrutiny of the court, that the real motive came into focus. Lewis Williams had not been targeted because of a single argument or a fleeting moment of anger. He had been hunted because of what others believed he represented: the threat of being judged, the risk of being underestimated, the pressure to act when hesitation was considered weakness. The verdicts that followed were more than legal outcomes. They were a warning. They exposed how quickly perception can turn deadly and how easily ordinary people can become complicit when fear outweighs reason. The story of Lewis Williams, pieced together in the courtroom, revealed a haunting reality. Sometimes, the most dangerous battles are fought long before the first shot is fired, in the quiet decisions that no one sees coming. Even after the courtroom doors closed, the consequences of that afternoon continued to ripple through Mexborough. Lives had been altered forever, not just for Lewis Williams' family, but for the young men whose choices had set this tragedy in motion. The streets he once walked freely now carried a weight no one could ignore, a reminder that one wrong step, one decision driven by fear or pride, can never be undone. The sentences handed down were final, yet they only captured a fraction of the cost. Families mourned, communities whispered, and a town tried to understand how a life could be taken so suddenly over something so fragile as perception. Friends described Lewis as polite, full of life, someone who deserved more than this. And as those words were repeated, it became clear that the real tragedy was not just the shooting itself. It was how a series of small choices, each seemingly insignificant, had led to this irreversible end. The shocking truth is that Lewis Williams' death was preventable, not by luck or by chance, but by intervention, by courage, and by questioning the narratives that had quietly built around him. Yet, in a culture where reputation can outweigh reason and fear can outweigh conscience, no one stepped forward soon enough. And because of that, a young man's life was stolen, and the lesson was etched into the memory of everyone who witnessed it. As we reflect on this case, one thing is painfully clear: the line between ordinary life and tragedy is thinner than most of us realize. And sometimes, surviving the streets is about more than skill. It's about being noticed for the right reasons at the right time.